Bonjour, hello, OCO, which means I see you in Cherokee. I know that there has been speculation about what is going on at UNE headquarters. When I was elected,
Quand
I
j'ai
was
été
clear that
élue,
members would come
j'ai
first,
clairement
and I would ensure appropriate representation of members based on their collective agreement. This is non-negotiable. Since taking over the organization on March 8th, 2024, I have discovered practices that do not align with our mission. Of the 15 components, UNE has double the amount of duty to fair representations complaints against it with PSAC, and this is unacceptable. Due to this, we are implementing new processes to represent members. To do so, hard decisions are necessary. It has also come to my attention that many financial practices are not in line with the industrial standard. I will not rubber stamp bad past practices. I put new practices in place and expect that the new practices would be followed. My approval of financial expenditures will be based on policy and pre-approval. I am keeping the national executive apprised of the situation and seeking their guidance. I believe in leading with those who were elected to represent the membership. I ask that you trust that we are acting in the interest of the membership and protecting UNE. Now, I am so honored to sit here for today's town hall with Phyllis Allen, who's actually was the president of my own local when I was still a member in good standing, like many of you may be. I am Alisha Kang, national president of the Union of National Employees, and I am honored to be here to talk about women's issues in March, which obviously is an important month for women. To honor mothers about to give birth, the Navajo people organize blessing ways. When they gather in the circle, they introduce themselves by giving their given name, then their mother's name, then their grandmother's name, and can also name any daughters they may have. To honor their culture and to be being more intentional and thinking of women and the gift they are in our lives. I would like to introduce myself in the same format, and later Phyllis will do the same. My name is Alisha. My mother's name is Linda. My grandmother's name is Eugenie, and my daughter's name is Cairo. Phyllis?
Oh, hello, everyone. My name is Phyllis. My mother's name was Lydia, and my grandmother's name was Helen. And I have two daughters, Lindsay and Moira.
Thank you, Phyllis. Joining me today is Phyllis Allen, Regional Vice President of the Region of Ontario. And Phyllis has been a champion of women's rights within the union, timelessly advocating for policies and uplifting and empowering women in the labor movement. Women have played an instrumental role in shaping our union, advocating for fair wages, safe workplaces, equitable opportunities for all members, and yet we also recognize that there is still much work to be done to break barriers, challenge biases, and ensure that gender equality is a priority in the workplace and within the union itself. Thank you all for being here, and let's begin. So, Phyllis, to start, can you share your perspective on the historical role women in the labor movement and how that has shaped where we are today?
So originally, women became unionized. They were garment workers. And so they realized that they needed some kind of support. And I think that happened. It happened in Britain. It came to America. It came to Canada. And then we found out that they don't need to be just one kind of person. We can be anything we want. And then seek to the Second World War. And, you know, we had all these women taking on non-traditional roles in environments that were unionized already. And so we realized we had more power than we thought before.
Including Queen Elizabeth, who was a mechanic.
She was.
She was a mechanic. That was, you know, very inspiring, I'm sure, for a generation of women to see the young royal, you know, take on such an active role.
It was amazing when you think about it. most people, I think, are used to seeing her with her hair curled and her handbag, but she could do things that was great.
Yeah, she was rolling up her sleeves as much as the men were.
I know.
So it was just
Great.
fantastic to look back at. Over the years, we've seen progress, but we also have known gender equality in union is still an ongoing battle. What do you see as the biggest challenge women face in the union today?
One of them, I think, is dead-end jobs, in the sense that you come, especially in the government, you have to be well enough educated to get into the government, and you feel that there's all of these possibilities. And then a lot of times you get there and you begin your career and end it at the same level. And part of that is now, I think, what happens is that we don't have merit involved anymore. It seems to be talent management. So if you're selected, you can go places, and often you're not. And often women work just like everybody else to make a living. You work to make a living. You work to provide for your family. And we also, as women, have other issues like childcare. All of these other things that come into play that so often don't necessarily affect men quite the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you that oftentimes what talent management means is, within the government at least, what I've seen is the people who will say yes to management, right? And so talent management ends up being a weaponized tool against people who see the world differently. And women see the world differently than, traditional styles of management that come from men.
Oh, I agree with that. Absolutely. I think that's one of the big things that we face all the time.
And then another challenge that I see is that oftentimes, because women take maternity leave, that's also used against them, because they have to take that break in their career. Well, oftentimes the men don't take the parental leave, and so their careers continue to flourish.
I think that happens a lot too. And, now maybe with voices of women being heard, and we're looking at getting better daycare and, following the Quebec where you can get, $10 a day daycare is really something, because a lot of women actually work just to pay for the daycare so that they can maintain a career when their children get a bit older.
Yeah. And I found that in union spaces, there's a similar sort of, trend where when I look at the bylaws and the policies, nowhere have we accounted for a woman being in the presidency that could be pregnant.
That's true.
We've never thought that would be an option. And so in some ways, we're having women self-exclude themselves because they think, I couldn't take a break to have a child while I was president. I can't be in that position because there's no accounting for that in our rules.
And that's true. Although I do think one thing I do like to see is when we go to union events, we have events, and people bring their children, and the union provides absolutely fabulous daycare. And if the babies are too small, they just come into the plenary with us, and we see them, and we think, oh, future union members.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I was just, when I recently found out that Noah was pregnant, I said, "Yay, we're having another UNE baby," because to me, there's a sense that it's part of the family. The baby is part of the family, and the more hands that we have supporting the women having children in our union, the more they can participate in our union.
I know.
And so, what I hope to see is, because, we have Jan and we also have Eric that have small children, and we're seeing them participate in a full way. I want to see more women participating in a full way. And
exactly.
Yeah.
So my grandson, when I live in Hamilton, and we have the Workers' Heritage Museum there,
Yes.
and they do programs for Easter break or whatever. And when Logan went there, they actually made posters and they did a picket line outside of that for the little kids.
Yeah.
And he's gone to all kinds of Labor Day parades. So I think starting with young children who are involved in the union movement, whether they're girls or boys, I think can show this is what the power of this is, and that we're going to make it better. It may not happen instantly, but I do believe in future generations it will definitely help in that way by including them.
And I do, in that sense, I do see progress. But what I'd love to see is that women are not making the decision not to participate because they're thinking of starting a family.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really hoping for in the next few years.
Yes, I hope so too. And the younger women getting involved, like a lot of times young people are not trying to get involved, and we're doing really well encouraging young workers, and we're getting because the public service, most of us are women. Like we're more
almost
than
60%.
half, almost
Yes.
60.
Yeah.
So we need that voice and that youth voice to come through as well.
I love that. So our union has been working on several initiatives to support women. Could you highlight some of the key programs or policies that are helping to push for equality and inclusion of women?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of them going on. I think we're doing well with that in the sense that we're bringing it up. We're making, there's women's committees that you can join. There's so many things that are there available for women. We have in our collective agreement family time that you can take off to take your children to appointments. These are things that are really important, I think, for us. And I think the more that we bring that in and the more that we secure family as something that is to be honored within the bargaining units, I think that'll really help as well. And I think we've got so many good things and we just need to be louder.
Yeah. And I'm really enjoying what I'm starting to see as more of a trend is that it is not just women taking parental leave. It is also the partners that are taking parental leave. And I think that shifts society's mindset that is a woman's responsibility rather than a parent's responsibility.
Yes.
You know, like I was lucky, and I know you know some of the people from our local back in 00221, where we had several of the men off on parental leave, and I think that means that they're sharing the responsibility and the career costs that it takes to go on parental leave.
Oh, I think so, and I think it just builds stronger families, and stronger families. The stronger the family is, the more you can work it out together. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, and the more active I think they can participate in the union work as well. So for those attending today, whether you are new to the union or a longstanding member, what are some of the concrete steps that you can support women's rights with in the union?
So very first is get involved. There are women's committees. There's advocacy groups. Support each other instead of seeing other women as a threat to what you want. Support them, get together. The more voices that are heard, that are agreed on, then you're talking more to management, and management knows it's not just you personally, it's other women that are involved. And run for leadership. Start at your local level. Get in there and do the work. It's, you're never alone. Like, that's the thing, you're never alone. There's always people. You have a regional team. You have other locals that can help you. We have the national team, the executives. You're never alone. You can call your labor affairs officer. Douglas Hill has really a great understanding of what to do and how to advise you to do it. So I really think women need to start doing more of that.
Yeah.
It's good to see.
And, it was very exciting, I think, to look at the makeup of the current National Executive Table. We have a lot of women at the National Executive Table. Yourself, we have Gail, we have Gloria, we have Cheryl, we have Haley, we have Bev. Like, it is so wonderful to see so many women taking leadership roles in the union. And that's on top of the fact that we have the assistants and the human rights reps. And to see our organization grow with so many women taking key leadership roles has been just amazing. And I know that I'm only the second woman president of the organization, but I think that through the women that I'm seeing come up through the ranks of the 57, I know that there's not going to be as long a delay for the next woman president as there was for this.
Absolutely. And the fact that UNE voted yourself and Haley, like, we are so proud of that. You have Black background. Haley's got a Black background. We've got Black women in there. It shows that it can be done. And we are rocking it, I think, our executive with yourself and Haley. And it's bringing in equity right round the table, not just as women, but other equity members.
Yes.
We're welcoming, we're inviting.
Yes.
We want you to come into our space.
Yeah, and we're creating that safety where women can actually thrive in leadership. And
exactly.
And it's not about like doing leadership the way in a masculine way, where we're actually really doing it from a different perspective.
I know. And in Ontario for our regional team, we only have one male.
He's outnumbered, poor guy.
I know. He's wonderful and he fits in, and all of my team are amazing. But there's myself, and I have two assistants who are women. One is a youth worker, and then we have our HR person. And so Phil is a little outnumbered. But, he's having a baby next month.
I know. I'm
so excited for him.
I know. I can't wait. Again, another UNE baby for me.
Exactly. Yeah. Coming up.
Yeah. So, Phyllis, can you tell us more about what was SSO, but now is DCC, and sort of give us a bit of a background on that job and sort of what it represents in terms of women in the federal public service?
So SSO was formed because what used to happen, going back quite a while, women were given the jobs that was traditionally women, and they worked from home, and they worked for 10 days a month, and they collected the data for employment statistics. So they collected what they called labor force. And we took a long time to get unionized because they felt there wasn't a political will. But we did get unionized, and we got unionized, and we were called statistical survey operations. The problem was, even though the job expanded from the 10 days a month to being year-round with many different surveys that were collected and the data that we could collect, we were still totally in precarious work. So what would happen is one longtime SSO member used to say, my supervisor decides whether I eat macaroni or whether I eat steak. Because they would take work away from you just at the drop of a hat. They would not give you work if they didn't like you. And what we do is, in the field, we would go to someone's house. You just go ring the bell and say, hi, you got a letter saying we would be coming to talk to you. And we're asking very personal information. So we finally got unionized, and our first contract was okay. The second contract, sadly, we lost some stuff. And then we finally got a really good contract, similar to the people who work in what's essentially a call center. So they would actually work in a building. as call center workers, but none of us were ever allowed to be full-time, no matter how many hours you worked. And then and they still do that. They don't give people full-time work, but then all of a sudden they want you to work extra hours. But our pensions are based on an average work week.
Right.
So it's not been easy, but we were in the field, we were thrilled with our final SSO contract, though not thrilled with the negotiator who essentially said, well, we don't really need all this because we're either ladies who lunch or students, so we're not really that important. But we collect the data. So then we got rolled into Treasury Board, and we were made great promises that we would get all kinds of opportunity for other type of work that could lead to full-time, but it has not transpired. I think there's one person got a full-time job out of it so far.
Wow.
So it's really been a struggle, and we're still part-time, and we're still, even on the phones, like you're just expected to accept that people are yelling at you or being aggressive on the telephone, or you go to houses and the people who go to houses, there's been a marked increase in incivility, and so we're still in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, and definitely, I think we've all seen out of the pandemic that people's fuses are a lot shorter than they used to be. Mm-hmm. And whether you're a CAT-T, which is a telephone
That's right.
person, or a CAT-P, which is a in-person statistical or data collection clerk, there are unique challenges with both of those roles.
Absolutely.
And there's a challenge with actually making sure that people get the 10 days in the month so that they're actually eligible even for their benefits. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to work a minimum of 10 hours a week to get benefits.
Right.
And so, and then we have a 56-day schedule. And there's always this threat hanging over that, well, we don't know how much work there'll be next time round, the next schedule. And it just can be changed. It's the flick of a switch. Yes, on a whim. So.
Well, that's very unfortunate. And I know that, like in the past, administrative tasks, at least within the public service, have often been called pink ghettos. Have you heard this term before?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
And this is truly what we were.
Right.
Yeah, and still are in some degree.
Right. So it often disproportionately women that work in these administrative roles and, their male counterpoints, even if they're in administrative roles, they're not trapped there. They tend to move on and be able to go on into management or supervision or other things like that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
And that really does happen a lot. And I think that comes back to talent management, doesn't it?
Yes.
So, I think there's still the idea that men are the breadwinners. So women are the people who work for the extras.
Yes.
And that's not true at all. And the other thing is now, with no one rolling over into permanent status. We fought for this a couple of collective agreements ago, and we had people who had been there for 12 years, 14 years, 15 years, and they'd always been a term employee.
Wow.
And we finally got, after 4 years, you could roll over into being indeterminate, but that got taken away. And when we became Treasury Board, every one of us, indeterminate or term, was put on your probation.
Yeah. And I agree with you about this perception that men are still the breadwinners. And I think, we need to look no further back than the recent pandemic, where it was mostly women who had to leave the workplace to do the child care when child daycares were closed,
Yes.
women were left with the responsibility of going to either care for their parents or their children. And part of that is the disproportion of earnings between men and women. And so oftentimes the man was seen as the breadwinner because his salary was higher. And so they even referred to it as the pink depression,
Yes.
because it was mostly women being headed back home. And so even though we think as a society we've come so far, we still have a lot of road to
We have
make
a
up.
lot of road to hoe, for
Yes,
sure.
yes. And, there's still a lot of challenges, even beyond that, that sometimes the worst challenges that we face don't always come from men, Phyllis.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
A lot of times, women in positions of not necessarily power, and I would think a lot of times they're very concerned for their own spot. So what they're doing is they're making sure that they're, following every direction that comes from above. And in some ways, they lose a bit of their humanity in that, or they forget that the person sitting across from them is just, a woman who's trying to get ahead in her job, trying to feed her family, trying to make sure everything is working. And a lot of it, they can be quite intolerant of it. And it's such a shame. We need to band together more and say, and we need to get more things in collective agreements that are specific to women in those situations.
Yeah.
Especially single mothers.
I know. I agree with you. Oftentimes they're left with the bulk of the child rearing. And, the expectations, or at least the word in society, is still not one of holding men accountable when they're not child rearing, right? It's oftentimes this boys will be boys, or, mentality. And the bulk of the child rearing is left with women. The other thing that I've noticed, and, you'll see this on teams, when people want to move up, right? You'll see that, there's maybe one or two women, and then let's say it's a group of 10, and there's 2 women spots, and all the other ones are filled by men. Instead of thinking, we could get 3 or 4 or 5 women, instead we think, well, we all have to compete for those 2 positions against each other.
Yes.
And so the daggers come out.
I know, that can happen too. Yeah. And what we need to say is, why isn't there a group of 10 women there?
Right, exactly. It could be 10 women. We don't need it all to be a group of 10 men to be in those roles. And so I would agree with you. So how can women become more involved in shaping the union policies that directly affect them?
I think we have to empower each other, and we have to just have a very direct approach. We are valued, we are valuable, and we hold some of the cards. We can do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
People have to be educated. And one thing is, everyone should know their collective agreement. And really, people need to understand the very careful wording of collective agreements. As soon as it says, unless otherwise stated, then you really have to look at that. It's not a given.
Right.
So we have to really educate on that. And we really need a lot more women in bargaining committees, because they can really see those things, I think. And it's not that I'm anti-male in any way, but often the preferences are different.
Yeah.
For
The
men.
concerns are different.
The concerns, yes.
Yeah, because I remember myself, on my bargaining team, it was myself and Cass, a fellow Parks Canada member. We were the only 2 women, and it feels very difficult to convince people who don't deal with our issues to prioritize them at the bargaining table.
Yeah, exactly.
When, oftentimes our issues get left behind. And, I can name a few, that definitely have been coming up for women. Menopause being one of the big ones in terms of some of the medical impacts that it has while you're going through that process. Pregnancy being another one.
Yeah.
Difficulty with conceiving or miscarriage related leaves. And I find that, you know, it's great when our union brothers and siblings support us behind that. But it would be so helpful if there were more women at the table to say, no, this is a real bona fide issue that women face that men may not be facing.
Yeah.
Right.
Like the frequency of, you know, everybody assumes a pregnancy is a simple thing, and it never is. It definitely isn't. And a lot of women need much more time off for appointments during pregnancy. And what you need is you need other women to be supportive of that and vocally supportive of that, as opposed to feeling like, well, that means I have more work to do.
Right. And you know, I know that even I had very complex pregnancies myself. Both cases I had to go on disability prior to actually delivering. And, you know, I remember feeling very vulnerable that this would be used against me in my workplace, you know, and there's not always the support when you're going through that. You know, it's great when people have, you know, my mom was one of those glowing pregnant people who would just, you know, skip around. And I was the person who still had morning sickness on the day of delivery. And I was like, this is not fair. But women's circumstances are so different when they experience pregnancy or loss of pregnancy or attempt to, you know, people going through IVF or adoption or any of these, you know, family growing circumstances. There is not a lot of openness in the workplace to hear about the challenges that come with that.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, also, and it's not that men don't deal with domestic violence, but we know disproportionately it tends to be women. And, you know, for any woman who's had to leave their partner and be in a shelter, again, there's not a lot of understanding in the workplace for these types of circumstances.
You know, that's true. I just did health and safety training, and one of the comments I had on it was they were talking a lot about security in the workplace. And what they weren't mentioned, at no point did they mention the fact that you could be working with someone who's affected by domestic violence, and their partner could be trying to get into that workplace. That was mentioned in that, and I wrote, and that was one of my comments. Like, that needs to be more addressed.
Oh, I agree with you.
You know, you can be really, you could be the person beside the person who's being, you know, chased by their partner or whatever. So it's really something we have to support.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even you know, workplace policies don't always consider. And I'll give a situation that happened to me not, you know, many years ago, is that we had an emergency list of all the people who work there's numbers and emergency contacts. And I had a coworker actually find out where I lived based on the list, and showed up to my home, and which was frightening, obviously, very frightening. And after that, the workplace actually implemented a policy that only management could see the list. But that's something that many people would never have thought of. Like, you just post a list of employees, where they live and what their phone numbers are, without considering that there may be an adverse impact to a female colleague by doing that.
Exactly.
And I can tell you that I found that, you know, quite frightening myself. So when I became a manager, it was definitely something at the top of my mind, not to put the list out of, you know, where the employees live and you know, to give their phone numbers of their people to all the staff.
All the staff. That's right. Like, there has to be some kind of safety.
Yeah. So what kind of barriers do you think prevent women from filing grievances? And how can the union support women to feel empowered? We talked about the collective agreement, and I have to agree with you 100%. When I finally really understood my collective agreement, it felt very empowering to know, like, no, they can't get away with this kind of stuff. I have rights. I know what my rights are. So what other things do you think?
I think we also have to have, like, really, we have to have like lunch and learns or something for the people who work in collective areas. You can learn, educate, just join tasks. You know, we could have in every office, ideally, you could have someone who would spearhead all women's issues.
Right. That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe on the locals as well, there could be a new position.
Yeah, and I know coming out of the PSAC convention, they were actually encouraging that we put women in positions of leadership.
Exactly.
To lead each other. Now I know that we have a representative for women as the rep for women across the country,
Yes.
MJ.
Yes.
So she's a great resource.
She is. Yes.
And we also put together that women's committee just recently that hasn't got up and running, but I know Gail will be getting that up and running soon. And it's really to give a platform for women to talk about women-centric issues, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we need to train them to get empowered. You know, that's it. Like, the more you know, the better you can act and react.
I agree. I think that that's correct. What advice would you have for women who feel unheard or unsupported in their workplace, but don't know where to start?
Well, I think you have to, if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. I mean, that's the thing. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. Yeah. So I think you can write things down and make sure you know what you're feeling, and then you can start asking people. Ask your colleagues. Find out who your union people are. Ask them. Talk to your manager and say, this just isn't feeling right.
Yeah.
I think some of those things are really simpler, and I think everybody should get to know how to find out where the policies are and the procedures that are expected. You know, on the internal website for your workplace, they're there if you know where to look.
Yeah.
And you're not alone. Talk to people in the lunchroom if you have to.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that one. Another one that I find really helpful is to document things.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes you talk to people and they take that as like, because oftentimes they'll go, oh, they're just complaining, or, especially when it comes to women, oh, they're making a mountain out of a molehill. Right. And I think when you document things, you then have a record and this sometimes happens, as you know, Phyllis, that you're the victim, but they try to turn that around somehow on you.
It's your fault.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. They Darvo you, right? They reverse victim and abuser all the time.
Yeah, they definitely do. And I think documenting, and that's time and place, and do it as soon as possible. And if you have a verbal conversation with your supervisor and it doesn't go well, go back to your desk and write them an email to say, just following up on our conversation, and it's listed, it's documented.
Yes, especially when you say, hey, this is what I walked away understanding from our conversation. Mm-hmm. And then, that gives them the opportunity to correct if it's not right. Yeah. But I will tell you that when it's sometimes not right, they'll call you and say, why did you put that in writing? And I'm always like, so I can testify. Yeah.
That's really good.
I said I need a perfect recollection when I need to testify later. That usually raises a couple eyebrows, Phyllis, for sure.
I like that.
So I want to thank you, Phyllis, for such great insights today. And I know that we're coming towards the end of our discussion, but I think we have some time to open it up to questions to the audience. And so I think this would be a great opportunity to reach out to the members online. And I think Ellen Cross is raised her hand and is going to jump in here. So just lovely to see you, fellow sister sibling Ellen. I know that you're recently recovering because you were not feeling well, but fabulous to have you joining us.
Thank you, Madam President, and Phyllis as well. I actually have two little questions. So we talked about concrete steps for women's committees. So most of us, we have 40 hours, we work 40 hours a week. We have kids, we have grandkids, we have a home, we have community involvement. So has the union or UNE ever thought of making some kind of arrangement so that people can actually get some pay for some of this volunteering that they do? Because, we work full-time jobs, but we also work full-time jobs for our union, even if it's just at the local level, but especially at the national level. So that was my first question. Is there any kind of concrete policies or procedures going to be put in place that might be able to help out women in this area?
I think that's a great question, Ellen. And what I will say is that I think that the model that we've been applying is a bit broken. And the reason why I'll say that it's broken is that, there's an eliteness to believing that people have so much time to give away. Like, when women used to stay home and do the Jello bowls and, that we have all this spare time, when we really know that society has come to a place where both individuals need to work to make a living wage for two people. And then the expectation that we then have people do volunteer work in a place where we would never accept that from our employer, right? And I think we really need to think about unionism as a vocation and a calling and not some kind of, community charity work. We're fighting employers, the law, the legislation. We're fighting politicians. We are not talking about in your backyard kind of work, right? It is not I'm giving a few hours to the church in my community. We're talking about hundreds of hours. And I think that we need to move away from the idea that it's okay to exploit each other in the union sphere, because taking somebody's labor and their skills and expertise is work, right? And we should compensate people for work. So we're actually definitely looking at moving forward, looking at putting a new system in place when we go to the next convention, to look at making sure that people who are putting their skills and their talents to work for the union are compensated for those skills. So thank you for that question. You had a second question, Ellen. So let's...
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. So my second question is pay equity. So I'm actually on the Pay Equity Committee for Parks Canada, and it still amazes me. I don't know why after all these years, but it still amazes me the difference between the pay and no disrespect to any men of any kind on the call, but the difference between the pay between men and women doing exactly the same job. And the reason I joined the Pay Equity is because I really feel that we need to have this rate across the board, that if you're doing the same job, you should expect the same pay. So has UNE any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you. And as you know, I was on that committee with you as well for a long time. And I think, we know this, that categorically women were seen as administrators rather than program managers, right? And so, even in the titles, there's a subtle misogyny to it. It's that, men could manage programs, but women could type and administrate things, right? And I think that takes away from the analysis and the skill that comes from administration. I'm going to tell you that without administrators, nothing happens, right? Documents don't move, things don't get signed off, contracts don't get made. And I think that from that perspective, obviously this has been a long fight to get to the pay equity, discussion. And in some ways, it is always under threat, as you know, to revert back. I mean, we're really seeing that with the US right now, where you're seeing a reversion of women's rights that have been long fought for. And, I look to Phyllis and yourself, who come from the generation who were burning their bras and, really brought women's liberation to the forefront in the workplace in a very meaningful way. And I'm sure it's immensely disheartening to see this circle back as a discussion of women's place in a modern workplace. We are great program managers. We are managing the entire household and the husbands. And, we can do as much as men can do. And I think that we actually are doing a disservice when we tell men that they are somehow, better than women in the workplace. And I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but I said there's a society that continues to foster that mindset that is, that is right. And this is, it's acceptable. You know what I mean? And I think that from my perspective, this fight for pay equity, if we don't win it this round, it's going to be at least another 2 decades before it comes around again. So I really hope that you're feeling the coalescing of us women around you and our arms, supporting the work that you're doing. Especially, I know how complex the Parks Canada, categorization of positions and the amount of actual, job descriptions there are within that organization just alone to get there. So, I'm so immensely grateful for the work that you're doing on the pay equity, and looking forward to seeing the fruits of your labor as we move this forward. Thank you, Ellen. Now, I think there might have been a question in the chat, if that's correct. And I don't know if we can go to that. I see Sherry's hands up, so I'm going to go there. And then if somebody could get the question off of the chat, that would be wonderful.
Hello, ladies. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you for having this forum and recognizing International Women's Day. And in that spirit, I also wanted to ask a question of the UNE about the topic of misogynoir.
Mm-hmm.
It's a topic that I think had a great effect on our neighbors to the south when they presented the most capable person to run their country, and she was rejected. It's a sensitive topic that within women, we don't like to talk about. But it's something that I think that we have to address and talk about the schisms within our own group. If there's any sight to saying this needs to be a topic in UNE women's forums coming up, we need to get experts to teach ourselves and to have those difficult discussions. And I would like to have your opinion on that.
Thank you. That's a great question, Sherry. And what I would say is that actually, when I was still at Parks Canada, I was actually working on language around some of this terminology. I did share with the national executive when I became president. And so for those who don't know what misogyny noir is, it is a flavor, and I'm going to call it a flavor, of misogyny that emasculates women of color, specifically Black women, to be more manly or less feminine than our other sister siblings. And that we are more capable of like physical labor, that we don't have feelings, that we don't feel pain to the same extent. So oftentimes what happens is in the hospital, they'll ignore a woman of color or a Black woman who's saying that she's in pain because for a long time, and actually only up until recently, many of the medical books actually said that Black women don't feel pain the way white women do. And so it's sort of propagated a narrative around Black women being very manly. And there are other aspects to it, like the covering of our hair, that happened because our hair was seen as obscene or inappropriate to be seen in public. And so it is a form of misogyny that is very targeted towards Black women and their space in society as non-feminine, more masculine women. And I think that it's a great topic for the upcoming Women's Network. I'm sure there are several others. My hope is that the committee will put together at least a discussion once per quarter, once they get started. But it's a great topic to really get into because there is some expertise. And I have to agree that even within, as even within the Black community, oftentimes, even our Black men will make disparaging comments about Black women being too masculine or taking too much of a leadership role or filling in voids. And so, or that they would never date women that were Black. And so even within our own community, we deal with it being propagated. And so it is a very dangerous nuance to the misogyny story because it means that we are not worth protecting. That is ultimately what the message is that Black women are not worth the protection of their sisters, and they're not worth the protection of society, and they're not worth the protection of men because they can protect themselves because they are manly enough to be their own protectors. And that is not true. If you cut me, I bleed. Just like any other woman, I have very deep emotions as well. So thank you for bringing that topic up, Sherry.
Could I just add something?
Absolutely, Phyllis.
I just can't leave this space today without stating what I feel is the obvious. We're talking about women and how we can help women. And one way that we can help women is there's going to be a federal election at some point. We elect our employer, so please make sure that not only that you vote, but make sure every woman you know votes. And women and girls, as soon as they turn 18 can vote. Get them out there. This is going to be really important for us because there is a concern that we could end up very similar to what they did in the States. We're going to start losing rights. There's going to be, depending on who the next government is. And we have to really watch for that. We're going to lose women's rights. We're going to lose trans rights. It's going to be awful if we don't vote carefully. Thank you. My rant.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the comments and the foresight. And it was an excellent explanation of misogynoir and the different levels and how things might have been different had more people been sensitive to this misogynoir and how it affected Kamala Harris, how it affects people like Meghan Markle, and the impact, the denigrating impact it has on our sisters in the union and broader society. And really, if we want to move forward, we have to address this and get a little uncomfortable. Thank you so much.
And I have to say that, I've definitely been feeling the sisterhood of my fellow sisters at the National Executive Table and their protection, even in my role. So I would like to applaud all of you for the work that you've done to make me feel, encircled with your protective arms of me as your leader. So I'm so appreciative of that, of yourself, Phyllis, Gail, Gloria, Cheryl, Bev, Haley. I've definitely felt, the warmth of your protection as my sister. So thank you for that.
Thank you, because we're so glad that you're there and that you're not going to be silent. So that is really important for us.
Thank you.
For me. as a woman moving forward. I mean, I'm not going to be in the union forever, but you've got a long career there.
Oh, well, thank you. And maybe you're not going to be here forever, but I'll keep calling you even when you leave, and you'll be like, why is he still calling me? So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to thank Phyllis for this engaging and inspiring discussion. And of course, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Your participation and dedication are what make the union strong. Remember that. It takes many hands to make light work. So you guys are the ones who are out there. You sister siblings are the ones out there, and you brother siblings, and all the 76 other genders that I don't know what their names are, but all of you siblings are the ones upholding this organization. The recording of this event will be available on the UNE website. And for those who have missed the live session or would like to watch again, let's carry this conversation forward beyond today. Support one another, get involved, and keep advocating for progress, especially for our sister siblings, especially this month, but every month, because it can't just be about women when it's, International Women's Day. It has to be about all of us every day. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Ladies.
Thank you, Alisha.
Take good care, everyone.
Bye.